This Hunter Prismatic build is wild. If you thought the Stasis Hunter build made you the king of damage resistance, then I hate to say it, but not anymore. Sure, if you want to mess around with Frost Armor for a minion's damage resist buff, then be my guest. Or you could just use this build and get an instant 50% damage buff at all times by just killing ads. And yeah, you heard that right, 50%. You'll tank so much damage that GMs won't even feel like GMs anymore. Now, you're also going to be using a brand new ability that when combined with other parts of the build, it just obliterates everything. Now, I've seen some good Hunter Prismatic builds over the past week, and although this build isn't a DPS king using double goldies like we had in our last build, it instead focuses around chaining arc damage by jolting literally everything that gives us that 50% damage reduction. And that, for end game content, is literally insane. And bear in mind that this 50% damage reduction is just the start of our reduction stacks and is applied through just using jolt effects. Which guys, Volt Shot exists. You can just use a weapon that has Volt Shot to jolt enemies on top of the abilities itself. It's like using a Hunter's Falcons build with volatile rounds and a void weapon going invisible, but instead we're using arc weapons to jolt enemies to then go invisible. Like what? How is that even a thing? But at the same time as going invisible, we will be getting up to 5 additional buffs simultaneously. You're going to get Radiant for extra DPS, you're getting Amplified for both speed and damage resistance, you're getting Overshields, Invisibility, Combination Blow for a stackable melee damage buff when using your abilities, and a bunch more. You know, it's crazy to think that most of these buffs are simply due to us jolting enemies, which can be done with a primary weapon. Crazy. And if that's not enough for you, you'll be using a single shot tether that feels like you're using Orpheus rigs to get that super back faster, but believe it or not, we're actually not using that. We're using the new exotic armor Gifted Conviction to improve the new Ascension Aspect so that we can add clear like the god we are. And you know what's so good about the Hunter Prismatic builds we have right now is that we don't even need to use Orpheus rigs for faster supers, or Falcons for infinite invis, or Assassin's Cowl, Liar's Handshake, 6 Coyote. It just doesn't matter what exotic you use for this build, because the way it's set up, you're going to be getting the majority of the effects that those exotics would usually give you anyway. So whatever you do run, it just ends up making the build even better for the specific area that you're trying to target. So if you did want to dedicate yourself to a specific invisibility build, then you could use Falcons and a void weapon, and you'll truly have infinite invis permanently, but we can do most of this anyway by just using Volt Shot. It honestly is a really fun build to use, and I just can't stop using it. Now, are you looking for cheaper games? Then be sure to visit my sponsor CD Keys, where you can buy games up to 90% off and get your hands on some of the best deals of releases this year, like the Final Shape expansion, Elden Ring, and even get Xbox Game Pass cheaper too. As a regular customer myself, I find that CD Keys is the best go-to site when it comes to buying games cheaper and making the most out of my money. In fact, they're so good that they have an excellent rating with over 160,000 reviews on Trustpilot, and with just a few simple clicks, you could be playing your next favourite dream game. Go check them out. Link below. Now, if you guys are liking this build and you want to see more top builds like this for the Final Shape, then don't forget to check out the full playlist down below, or you can find them over on my Mobilytics page. Now, with the launch of the Final Shape, we got 2 new items for build crafting. The first thing we got is the brand new arc aspect, which is the Ascension, where while airborne, consume your class ability energy to summon your arc staff that creates a burst of energy around you that makes you and allies amplified and jolts targets. Now what this means is that when you run in and jump in the air and then press the dodge key, you'll basically chain that arc damage jolting enemies, but because we're using the new exotic armor, the Gifted Conviction, activating Ascension throws bouncing explosives at nearby targets that also jolts and damages them. Jolting those targets will grant you damage resistance, so every time we jolt enemies, we'll get the resist buff, and this can stack up to 4 times, which at a 4 stack, it gives you a 50% damage reduction. And you know, the best part about this is that we can use any weapon that has Volt Shot, because reloading after killing an enemy gives the weapon a Volt Shot that jolts the next target. So we can just use any weapon like the Aikidos SMG to apply jolt effects to enemies, instead of just using our abilities. Now you might notice that we're actually going invisible after killing jolted enemies. This is because we're using the Stylist Executioner aspect, where defeating a target affected by any elemental debuff grants invisibility and true sight. So since jolt is a light debuff, it makes us invisible after killing them, so it's kind of like the Falcons build, where you would chain between volatile rounds and invis on a loop. So the same kind of thing is happening here, except we're using the jolt effects. Now for our abilities, you will want the Marksman's Dodge and a Combination Blow. The reason you don't want to use a Gambler's Dodge to recharge the melee is because we will want the shorter cooldown on the dodge, and we will use the dodge charge for our new ability, so we will never actually use the dodge itself. With a Combination Blow, we're using this to get the dodge back from a melee final blow. This just helps us have more uptime on that ability. I did try investing into strength stats to get the melee back faster, to then get the dodge back faster, but it was just too inconsistent in endgame content, because getting a melee final blow in say a GM just wouldn't be ideal. So in the end, it was better to go with 100 mobility to get that dodge back faster on its own, than just use the melee when it was appropriate to do so. But basically the way this build works is you would either run around jolting enemies to go invisible using weapons and abilities to get that damage resist buff, or you would run in and use your ability, then melee an enemy to generate an orb, or through other methods, because picking up the orb will give you radiant as well as a bunch of other benefits that further improve survivability and allow you to deal more DPS. From here you just continue using your abilities and getting weapon kills, and you can use Monte Carlo because dealing damage with that weapon reduces your melee cooldown, but also gives you a chance to instantly recharge the melee ability. And because of that you could then get a melee kill and get that dodge charge straight back. The dodge charge isn't perfect, but in most activities you play like Onslaught or anything that has a lot of ads around, it will do a good job at clearing a room and give you all those buffs and effects as well. So you can either run around with abilities or play it safe with a vault shot weapon. Now I'm using the Facet of Purpose fragment because picking up an orb will also grant an overshield. It will grant an overshield because we're using the Shadow Shot Deadfall tether, and you want to use this because there is an artifact perk called Shield Crush, where while having an overshield, our melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. And while amplified, or radiant, which will be almost all the time, we will get the same effect but for our grenade. That grenade is just going to be a grapple grenade, but you really can use what you want. I just like it because it allows me to go invisible, as it also counts as a debuff for Stylish Executioner. Now 4 other fragments I'm using are the Facet of Hope, because this will allow us to recharge our class ability faster when we have an elemental buff, which will be our amplified effect. Facet of Protection for more damage resistance, Facet of Balance for increased ability energy, and Facet of Courage so that our abilities deal increased damage to targets affected by darkness debuffs. This will be the Unravel effect from our grapple, which is just handy to have if the target doesn't die. In the artifact this season, if you're using a kinetic weapon like the Monte Carlo, you'd want to have the Elemental Cypher mod to create elemental pickups. That will be Void Breaches for us since we're using the tether. Then I am using this one here so that defeating weakened targets provides a small overshield. This will happen mostly when we use our tether. Then Radiant Orbs, which will give us Radiant when picking up orbs for extra DPS. Galvanic Armor for even more damage resistance when amplified, so that's just another 30% damage reduction. And bear in mind, this will be active almost all the time as well. And then Transference for increased ability damage while Transcendent. As for mods, you want 2 hands-on for faster super energy on melee kills, as well as a Cypher mod for the weapon that you're using. If you're using Vault Shot, then this would probably be Arc. Then every other mod, you just want to use things that will get your class ability back faster, or spawn more orbs easily to keep those buffs active like Radiant more often. Honestly, I've never seen a build like this have so much damage resistance, that it's not just high damage resistance, but also easily obtainable as well by just getting kills. It's crazy, because you don't even have to sit in a Duskfield grenade, and you don't have to worry about doing certain things. The only thing you need to do is just kill enemies and that's it. By far one of the best hunter builds to use right now in Destiny 2 Episode 1 Echoes for the Final Shape. If you like this build, then you might like some of my other builds, all of which you can find in the playlist down below or over on Mobalytics. But for now guys, I've been Divide, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, have a good one, and I'll see you then.